Welcome to the Imposter Syndrome Club with Jessamy G and Alice Edie, bringing you a very special bonus episode this week. This was such a fucking exciting opportunity that we were absolutely stoked to be invited to do, where we hosted a live podcast and artist talk down at KSR Gallery with artist Ellen Porteus. We are both such genuine fans of Ellen's work. Just two little fangirls up there pretending that we're cool. This was such a cool chat with Ellen. We talk a lot about her process and also the concepts behind her work and all of the usual good, juicy stuff we get into as the Imposter Syndrome Club likes to do. So we decided to make this a bonus episode because obviously, as it was a live episode recorded in the gallery, the audio is not, it's pretty good. Like, it's not terrible by any stretch of the imagination, but it's not the studio quality that you have come to expect from us. So please enjoy this bonus episode with Ellen Porteus, and we will be back in your ears next week. Well, welcome everyone. Lovely to be here. My name's Jessamy G. This is my lovely co-host Alice Edie, and of course the woman of the moment, Ellen Porteus. So just for a bit of background, we host a podcast called the Imposter Syndrome Club. We call it a podcast about life, work, feelings and the devastating weight of comparison. So we essentially talk to creatives of all types about a bit of the behind the scenes or a peek behind the curtain into what their lives actually look like beyond what you might see posted on Instagram or the sort of shiny version of it. So we were very, very excited to be invited by Ellen to come and do this live recording here tonight and talk a little bit more about this amazing exhibition and all of the process behind it. And we've been here for a little while setting up and just biting our tongues trying not to ask Ellen all of the questions that we have. We're like, no, that's content. Shut up. Gotta wait. So with that said, welcome, Ellen.
Thank you. So good to be here. So good to chat to you guys.
Welcome to your own show.
Yeah.
First off, congratulations. This is huge. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling so many things. I worked so hard in this show for a really, really long time. And so when you do that, you kind of never know how it's going to be kind of received when it's out in the world. And I was kind of just trying to focus on making the best work that I possibly could and not, concerning myself too much about, would it sell? Would people come? All that kind of stuff.
So rumor has it, because you're being way too modest, rumor has it that the show has sold out. Amazing.
Congrats. So after all that, the fact that it has been received really well is so crazy, and I just kind of don't really know how to feel about it yet. Yeah. I'm still kind of processing it, but it's such a amazing kind of feeling to know that people connect with what I've made, especially because this stuff in this show is pretty out there. So it's nice to know that there's people who love this weird stuff that I make. How good is that?
Yeah, there sure are. I've spent the last hour and a half wondering if there's somewhere that I could fit a pair of giant feet in my unit in Copenhagen somehow. But I'd love to know a bit more, Ellen, about the show and the sort of narrative, because I know that there's quite a strong narrative that sits behind it. And on the cards on your chairs, there's a little bit of an overview of that. Mm-hmm. But you've explained it so beautifully to us before. I'd love to hear a bit more about it now.
Yeah, so the narrative of the show is based on this main character who you see throughout the different pieces. So she is the groundskeeper, essentially, of this small planet. And the story kind of goes that she is in this watchtower looking over kind of what's going on in the planet, and then she notices that the occupants of the planet, this animals and plants and insects, have taken over. And so she goes and tries to kind of clean up and create some kind of sense of order back to this planet that she's supposed to be taking care of. But the more that she tries to take control of it, the more that the planet starts to kind of fight back, and the more chaos that kind of she spirals into. So eventually she kind of has to accept that, as in the show, one of the pieces is called Infinite Nonsense, that she just has to kind of like go with the flow of this kind of infinite nonsense. And that's kind of, it's all sort of a allegory or metaphor for ourselves. So she kind of represents our sort of conscience, and the planet is kind of our inner self. So it's about your conscious self trying to control, the parts of yourself that you don't like to show other people, or you want to change about yourself, or you think is different to other people. So it's all kind of very symbolic and metaphorical, but also kind of fun and like bubbly and cartoony. Yeah.
I love that about that. It's so striking when you see the works. I love how you kind of meet them visually, and they've kind of these really vivid candy colors, and they're so approachable. They're so beautiful. And then there are these elements of a darkness or a melancholy that are kind of threaded throughout. And that tension is really interesting. And to your point that you mentioned earlier, that idea of control, like how the groundskeeper is trying to essentially like tame the wildness that is this garden. Could you maybe speak a bit more to that idea of control in terms of what it means to you personally, and then also in terms of your practice? Because the works themselves are very resolved, and there is a strong sense that you know what you're doing and you have a really clear vision for the show. I don't know if that's what it feels like on the inside. But yeah, could you chat about what is control? How does control and creativity, how do those live together?
I guess the reason why, where this whole concept came from is like very personal to me, because I've done a lot of work throughout my 20s to sort of overcome this feeling of that I need to control the parts of me that I don't, or that I think are bad or that are different to other people. So it's very much inspired by the kind of like inner workings of my own mind and that feeling of like trying to control them. I feel like lots of people can relate to this, because I feel like lots of people feel like they try to control things that they can't. And when it comes to yourself, like there are things that you can't control what's happened to you in the past, or your personality or your genetics or anything like that. But yet we persist in trying to do so. And it is that kind of tension that I find really interesting to explore. So I've always explored in my personal work, like kind of complex and contradictory behaviours and patterns and things like that. So I guess this is like another evolution of that kind of exploration of that idea.
Yeah, I love that. And it's like one of those things you're told from you're a kid, like it's an easy thing to do to be yourself. You're like, well, but there are so many gross parts of me. If I was myself at you, you'd hate it.
Push you down. Take out, those are the weeds, right? Like those are the weeds and the creatures that emerge. Like,
yeah.
Well, yeah. And in that it's not that simple as being like, okay, well, now we'll be ourselves and we'll be happy when we accept those parts of ourselves. But the journey to get there, once you can, I imagine, is such a relief. But yeah, I love and appreciate the metaphor of it so much, that you're looking for that relief of letting go into the infinite nonsense. But it's such a journey to get there.
Yeah, it is. And in terms of like the kind of whole metaphor of this planet and this world, I went on a artist retreat, just a solo artist retreat to Magnetic Island last year. And the whole goal that I wanted to set myself was just to draw every day in nature. And so that's what I did. And so that's where all these kind of ideas for these creatures came from, because Magnetic Island is like, it's only just off the coast of Townsville. Like, it's so close to the mainland that we know of Australia. But because it's its own sort of isolated island, it's got its own ecosystem that's quite unique and different. And all the bugs there were really like big and colourful and crazy. And, you know, they have these like jellyfish that are microscopic and could like, apparently if they sting you, you get like this impending sense of doom. I don't know. It's crazy. Yeah.
That's amazing.
And I was like, wow, this is so interesting that it's sort of this little tiny island that's just evolved because it's responded to, I guess, whatever environmental elements or anything else that has been thrown at it. And then I kind of thought that that's quite similar to how people evolve as well, because that's how we grow as people. We're just responding and growing in response to whatever's thrown at us. And so, yeah, I think that's where I kind of came up with the idea of having like a landscape as a metaphor for a inner self, like a brain. Yeah. And I loved the idea that you could walk around in someone else's brain and get to know them better and understand them.
Yeah. And that is something, because with all of your shows and your work, you play in a lot of different media. There's the animation happening, there's the immersive installation piece of it, and then the kind of more traditional art on walls. Mm-hmm. And I know from your previous shows as well, I think I remember being inside a washing machine, like a giant washing machine that you made. So like there is that sense of not only are we looking inside this environment, but you are putting us physically as well inside this world. And like, yeah, my brain goes in like a million different directions, but there's also this sense of, with all the discussion now around like the microbiome and this idea that we literally contain worlds within us, these kind of like magical ecosystems. I'm like, it's not even like fantastical, right? But what I actually wanted to ask is, so thinking back to the artist retreats and Magnetic Island, and you mentioned drawing every day. What is the role of drawing in your practice?
I start every piece actually with words. Like, I'll brainstorm words first and have a concept first and kind of go from there. And then drawing is like after that usually. But I wanted to change things up with this, so it was more like drawing what I saw and then kind of adding that extra like sprinkle of magic or whatever it would be, like giving things extra eyes or whatever. Yeah, so but I'm trying to do it more because I think it's so important to draw as much as possible, because it's that thing that you can't really control the outcomes. You're just sketching whatever. You're not worrying about what's going to come out at the end. So I'm trying to do it a whole lot more, and I think it's a big contributor to this show is that I actually took the time and. I say take the risk because it's not really. There's no risk in it, just drawing. Like,
It's and this sort of touched on it a little bit, but I'm really interested in this sense of creating worlds, because you know, just walking into this space, obviously you feel like you're being drawn into a world, and observing that stuff on Magnetic Island. To what degree do you think that it's something that you sort of conceptually imagine and then you create it, or does the world kind of emerge and uncover itself as part of the process?
I think it just emerges and uncovers itself as part of it. But I love like a visual metaphor, or any kind of metaphor really. So the idea of the planet, I guess, came first, and then I'm like, okay, what does this planet look like? Like, you know, what are these, you know, skull berries represent? You know, what are the flaming butterflies represent? Like, and it kind of, builds itself out. It's the same in my previous show. I had like the laundromat. So I had like a big giant washing machine, and I had like big, you know, bottles of detergent and things like that. And that was all about repetitive cycles of behaviour. So it all kind of really starts with the kind of metaphor, joke, whatever you want to call it, and then like works its way out from there. And I love using language as well as part of it. So I love coming up with phrases like infinite nonsense, or, you know, in this show, you know, using phrases like she's in the clouds, which could describe, or she's on another planet, which could even be interpreted like as a positive or negative thing, or has multiple interpretations of it, because I really like that. I don't know, I just like double meanings and being able to read it kind of two different ways. And because this show is about, your inner self and the criticisms and the things that you try to hide. I liked using those kind of phrases that you could describe someone who's a bit weird, you know?
And it's also that idea of taking these metaphors that are meant figuratively and then creating the literal meaning of that, like treating it as if it was. And it's this kind of sense of, I think like there is such a sense of play as well with your work, that like that playfulness that's set or kind of resisting the heavier side of it as well. Speaking about the previous exhibitions, that was 4 years ago. So pre the big C.
I know,
pre those times.
Just before,
How is, as someone who makes work and is so spatial in the way that you share it. I mean, you've got obviously your animation practices that's very shareable on screens and is so beautiful in its own right and has its own, takes up that digital space. But as someone who clearly like revels in taking up physical space, like how was that time for you and how has your practice changed since the last show?
I think, COVID was difficult for so many artists, but I did struggle with having to kind of pull back on those kind of big installation projects that I was kind of really just kicking off with. Yeah. Like when I was in the head of like Facebook in Silicon Valley in March 2020 doing an installation with my good friend, and it felt like, oh, I'm going to be able to do this, you know, all over the world kind of thing. It was like this real, like, this is it, this is the momentum. Yeah. And so, came back and there was nothing for like 2 years that I could do with installation stuff, really. So that sucked. And I did struggle with it because I had digital work coming in, but I was like kind of not very, feeling very inspired, I think, to do it because I was like so keen to kind of try all these new things. And I am someone who likes to try like so many mediums and things, and I was kind of ready to do that. So that was not good. That was hard. But I guess it gave me the time now to like really to put on this show and to experiment with like new mediums and things like that. So it feels like this show is such a big leap forward in terms of what I've created. In my last show, I had prints. I didn't have any original work. This is my first show with original work. So even that in itself is like a big step, big like development, I think.
That's massive. And in so many, as you said, a number of times, so many different media. And I love that you mentioned trying stuff. We were talking about that a little bit before we started recording. Mm-hmm. I'd love to hear a little bit about that process, or from going like, okay, let's put this like giant pair of feet in the middle of a room, or whatever the thing is, or making things out of maybe materials you haven't worked with before. How does it go from like big dream concept to working out, okay, well, how the fuck am I going to do this in reality?
I think I take every opportunity I can to kind of come up with a big idea and then just go, I'm going to figure this out. And I think that's how I've like learned how to make like giant legs, or how to make like these woodcut things, or any painting, anything, or like working with all these different materials that I've used in this show, because I don't know, I just feel like, oh, this is surely possible. I can do a 3D sculpture, or I could do this, and then just try a bunch of things until it works. And I find that fun. And it's good to be kind of naive about these things sometimes, because you kind of can make it work if you do it, and if you just go like, there's a way.
Was there anything so disastrous you had to can it for this show?
It's more probably that I always am a bit too ambitious with my time. Okay. So, I really wanted to do like a zine and a full-length animation for this show of the story and everything to go with this. And up until I think the day before the show, I was like, oh, I'm going to do it. I'm going to make it happen. Things like that. But other than that, no, things have gone pretty well. Yeah.
You were still, I remember hearing that you were still covered in paint, like 4 minutes before the opening.
Yes.
What was the last thing that got painted?
We were doing the flowers on the installation.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, the installation was had to be the last thing because we had to paint the floor and paint the floor mural and like put it all together. So it sort of was all very the night beforehand and then all the day and up until a couple of minutes before people came in to see it for the first time.
That's how you know you're alive. It's quite an interesting sort of setup here in this gallery, isn't it? In that you have this residence and you're here for 2 months before your exhibition opens, which is really, really cool. I'd love to hear a bit more about your experience of that and what that was like, other than, the working right until 4 minutes before the exhibition starts.
So I got to be in here for two months, which was awesome because I love doing stuff that I love transforming spaces and making the space itself part of the artwork. So it was a really good opportunity to be able to like understand the space and respond to it rather than like being like, okay, I only have a week or less to bump in, which is usual for galleries. So everything has to be done beforehand. So it was awesome. Like I walked here every day and just worked 12 hours usually, just subsisted on burritos. I'm usually like so conscious of my health because I like try to like keep everything in check. So I keep, as creative people, you kind of have to like be a bit diligent sometimes, otherwise your creative like brain suffers, I think, a little bit. But when it comes to these intense periods, I think you kind of just have to roll with what you have to do to get through it.
That was literally going to be my next question, is like, how do you think about finding that balance? Because I think anyone who's worked in any creative field knows the temptation to kind of roll from burnout to burnout. How do you think about it? What's the answer?
I used to do that a lot, like because I would just say yes to everything and I would take too many things on. And after a few years of that, like it just became not doable anymore because like you only have I feel like every time you burn out, you kind of lose capacity. Like you can't fully recharge. It's like an old phone or something. So I had to change. Like there came a point where I was like, I got to a burnout that just wouldn't end. And I tried to restart and I couldn't. And it's not surprising because I was like in my studio and I would stay so long that I'd be walking home when the sun was rising, the next day. And that's only sustainable for so long. There came a point where I was like, I have to change something. So I just took little steps of like exercising, and now I do that every day, and that's like so important. And like then it's like sleep, and then it's like adding in like let's like maybe think about like what you're eating and maybe like take note of what makes you feel bad and what makes you feel good and all that kind of stuff. So I try to do that when I can, but just accept the fact that I know I'm going to like lose that sometimes and not be hard on myself about it, because you can't be perfect all the time with that kind of thing.
Which also, firstly, just is such a perfect echo of the show itself. Like, and that metaphor of a garden is so rich in that sense of like, it is that drive to control nature, and it's not a good or bad thing, right? It's just understanding that there's movement always. Like you can want to do your best and you can want to lay out the garden and give it the best possible chance, but also when the elements of chaos come up, like you say, like to be able to hold it lightly and not fight nature, which is way bigger than than all of us. And I think especially for artists where there is this kind of mythology of imagining like a Picasso or some like romantically fucked up person drinking red wine and doing drugs and going on benders and being like in their studio. There's such a romance around that self-destruction. and kind of reframing that, I think, is really important for all creatives. And yeah, I think this like incredible, almost, and I'm like so aware of this word. It's such a loaded thing, but like the feminine energy of a garden, and that idea of maintenance as being so often like the female role of caring, and what it means to care for nature, what it means to care for ourselves, but also kind of nature more broadly speaking. Yeah, it really comes through, and
that's such a beautiful interpretation.
It's on the walls. It's on the wall. So what like along to kind of continue that vein of like of growing and changing. So like, where do you take your practice next? Like, how do you think about like waking up and the show comes down and you need to make something new, but also you can't just keep producing, right? You've got to put stuff in. Like, what happens next? Or
I'm literally going through this. Like, I was having dinner before and like going, I don't know what am I supposed to do right now, because I don't know what the next kind of steps are, because I'm sad that the show's over and there's this weird energy shift after you do something that you work so hard on, where it's like, now where does all that energy that I have go? And I'm not sure. Like, if I'm not sure what I'm going to do next, basically, is what I'm saying. Yeah. But I think in my career, like, I like steering the ship sometimes and then like letting it go and seeing where it goes. So I'm really interested in seeing like what comes out of this show and the work that I've put out. But then also, like I am going overseas quite a bit this year. Like, I'm spending some time in Japan, like a few months in Japan at the end of the year. And I'm hoping to go to LA, and I'm going to Europe next month. So I think I would love to kind of like push my work into the faces of people over there and seeing what happens.
Just buy them each a chair on the plane next year.
It's such an important thing though, because, you know, speaking of that, like taking care of yourself and energy maintenance and stuff, is that and rightly so, when you create something that's beautiful and exciting, we want to know what's next. But honouring that self-care sounds like a gross thing to say, but you know what I mean, that on the way down, on that energy release as well as the energy build, and that you don't necessarily have to run straight into doing the next thing right away. I'd love, just going back a couple of steps to the metaphor of the garden, since it's so beautifully weaved throughout this conversation, how we take care of ourselves. Since we have the benefit of being in the room with a lot of your pieces here at the moment, I know that there are some really striking little sort of Easter eggs and metaphors within particular pieces of work. Did you have maybe one or two pieces that you'd like to talk to us about in a bit more detail around the metaphor that sits behind all of those? Yeah,
sure. Like I think like we're sitting right in front of one, which would be a good place to start.
Perfect. Let's do it.
So she is like trying to in the previous work, you'll see she's sort of been bitten by some of these berries, the skulls, and she's trying to kind of like pick them, weed them kind of out of the ground, because they've like kind of grown everywhere like weeds. And as she's doing that, you can kind of see this cloud like coming up over her, and this rabbit coming like over her shoulder. And then in the next part of the story, if we follow this around, the rabbit kind of comes and like surrounds her, like it's almost eating her. And then she's in this cloud world with all these sort of rabbits, real rabbits that kind of come out. Then she falls down a rabbit hole, she's in this water, and she comes out, and then the last piece is chaos reigns, because that's kind of like the acceptance of like letting chaos reign in both of the ways you could understand that word. So yeah, this kind of is about, I guess, the unintended consequences of what you think might be something that you're trying to help. So you're trying to like get rid of these elements of yourself, like which are the berries. But then that can have a knock-on effect that's really powerful that you can't kind of predict, and it can be like all-consuming. So if you're trying to kind of, like change a part of yourself or suppress a part of yourself, like what does that do to you as a person? What does that do to your internal landscape, and what consequences can come from that? So that's sort of that little nugget of the story.
I love that as well, that they're berries. It's that sense of like a weed as a concept. It's like it's just our human word for a plant that we don't have utility for. And so we changed that kind of classification, and that they're these berries, and that berries can be delicious fruits and nourishing. But I mean, I suppose that idea of like there are no bad parts of ourselves, that everything is there, that has emerged there for a protective reason, and like how you make sense of that is. Yeah. Is there a work that you're the most proud of here? Do you have a favorite? Are we allowed to ask that?
I think
is it like asking someone if they have a favorite kid?
Maybe, but I do. So it is this like rabbit. It's called She's Floating Away, and it's the rabbit that's kind of consuming the main character as she like goes up into the clouds. I'm really proud of that one because I think it was like a real moment of understanding how to use the wood in a new way. So it has like all these layers to it. So they're different thicknesses of wood, and they kind of create this three-dimensional kind of effect of the cloud. And so and that was like the first woodcut piece that I made for this whole show, and it helped me kind of figure that I could use the wood in a way that would enhance the characters that I had made. So I'm really proud of that because it was really difficult to work out and like really difficult to crack, and then like I cracked it. I was really happy and I was really excited because I felt like, you know, when you have like something that purely comes from yourself, like you haven't seen someone else do it and go like, I'm going to do that. It's like it's grown from this tiny thing inside you, and then you figure it out, and then you do it, and then you execute it, and then it's like then it's a piece sitting on the wall. It's like, wow, that happened. Like, and so it's, you know, you can be like, I don't know, it just means something, I guess.
Yeah, and you should be proud. Yeah, it's absolutely beautiful, and not only obviously the feat of working out how to do those things, but just as an aesthetic piece, that's the one I think that hits me in the feels the most of all of them too.
Yeah, I think there's something like emotive about it as well that's like kind of hard to pinpoint, and I like that it's like up for interpretation depending on what you see in it.
Something that I was struck by with that piece is I was thinking earlier, like walking around, like you have such an iconic style. Like long before I met you personally, like I've not followed your work at Jackie Winter, been to exhibitions, and I think I've definitely seen people imitate it as well, and yet it's always very clear when it's you and when it's not. And I was kind of thinking about that earlier, and I was trying to work out like what that is like, and I don't think it's as simple as one answer. I think it's a kind of a constellation of things. But what's so interesting about that rabbit piece is outline is such a foundational part of your work. And if someone asked me how to define your style, that would be one of the first things I go to. And that piece doesn't have outline. It's like the only piece that doesn't have like such a definite outline, and yet it's still so part of the kind of ecosystem. So maybe if you could discuss that idea of style and like how you found what has become your kind of iconic way of working, and how you keep true to that, but also keep it changing and evolving.
I think it started when I started studying design. So before I went to uni, I was a very creative person, but I was sort of like in bits all over the place. Like I loved playing guitar, and I loved photography, and I loved like painting. But and when it came to choosing a degree, I was like, I just kind of randomly settled on design because it sounded interesting. I was very set on moving from Newcastle, where I grew up. And so I just kind of went with my gut feeling and chose it. And design wasn't ultimately like for me. I think I always needed to do something that was more self-expressive. But I got to learn all these techniques and try so many different things. And so once I kind of learned how to use some of the design software, I was able to kind of appropriate it for my own like artistic practice, if that makes sense. I don't think I use like the software in the way that it's meant to be used. Like I feel like I use Illustrator and After Effects, which I use to animate things, like very idiosyncratically, and it's not how I would teach anyone to do it, but it worked for the aesthetic that I wanted to create, and it felt really natural. And I always am on the lookout for things that feel really natural to me, because that's how I know that I'm doing something right, and that's how I know I can produce like authentic work. You like try something, like try a pencil or a pen, or like you're like, I don't like this pen, like this pen sucks. No, for no reason, probably logically, but it's just what feels like natural and right to you. And so I would try lots of like different like watercolors or like whatever more traditional artistic mediums to express myself, but it was the unexpected design software that was it, which is like whatever, it is what it is, but it is kind of weird. So it allowed me to kind of like make this really bright poppy work that I always loved, but couldn't make using like watercolors or photography. I grew up like loving animation so much. So that was a big influence of it, like learning animation as well. And it kind of just grew from there. Like when I was at design school, I started going into like group shows and things like that and sharing it on Tumblr, and got a really good response from it. And that just kind of spurred me on, and I started getting paid work. And it all kind of grew from there. And I think it's like people say to me, that my work is really easily recognizable. Like they know when it's my work and when it's someone else's, which is like such a good compliment. And I think I just am instinctive with it. I don't try and overthink it. I don't like say, okay, it's time to like change things up, or I need to try something new. I just let it evolve and let it happen. And I think that's probably why I just let it be true to myself. And so that's why it looks unique to me, I guess. Yeah.
Let chaos reign, huh?
Yeah.
That's it's a fun thing that you touch on there, and I think probably reasonably common that we have this idea that those tools like software or whatever, that if you're not doing it in exactly the way as intended, that you're not doing it right. Like I used to be terrified that I would have to use something like Illustrator in front of someone else, be like, oh no, they're going to find out. But like, if you're getting the result that you want, who fucking cares if you're using it in exactly the right way?
Yeah.
And I think that that's so often where personal style and new ways of doing things come from, is playing with tools in ways that they weren't necessarily created for.
Yeah. And I think I just I do this a lot. I kind of take techniques from, like I did a couple of sign painting workshops, for example. I don't paint like a sign painter, but I got some techniques out of it, and like the brushes that I use are sign painting brushes, even though like if a sign painter saw me paint, they'd be like, no. That's not how you do it. But I think it's good to like, adopt things and then like refilter it through your own like way of doing things. I also just think I really don't like being told like how to do something, or that there's a right or wrong way to do anything. I just really like figuring it out for myself, which is a very stubborn thing, but it's I guess it's a good thing when it comes to art. But it's probably why I was never going to be a good graphic designer.
Just like this, but the logo bigger in the middle with the drop shadow. We were going to just take a few minutes at the end for, I don't know if there are any audience questions. It's an intimate group, so does anyone want to yell anything out? Otherwise, I got plenty.
Yeah, please.
I find it really interesting. So I followed you for quite a while, and I would never have picked someone that externally I see and make you so successful to have all this sort of like internal, I guess, doubt and obviously experiences that aren't, shown to the world. You talked about going through your 20s and sort of figuring out all these things. How did all that affect your creativity and your art processes? And was it, I guess, a challenging thing for you to be creative in those times as well? As someone that struggles with like mental health and things like that, I'm just curious as to how you navigate with that and how you have that.
Yeah, it was really hard. Because like my art career, my illustration career kicked off when I was quite young. Like I just finished uni and I didn't know anything. Like I was a silly baby. And I got like I had a bit of a struggle getting clients at first, but then it kind of just blew up. And so I was having this really kind of successful career and working with those awesome clients and externally like doing really well. But at the same time, like I felt my personal life was a mess. So many things were a mess. Like everything behind the scenes that I didn't show anyone was a mess. And that's hard because like people see, and it's like we all do it. People see the successful side of you and the side of you that you want them to see, but not the everyday things that you struggle with. So yeah, and it did really affect my creativity for a long time. And because I've worked on my mental health for a long time, I feel much more like free creatively now. So there's definitely a relationship between the two. There's absolutely no doubt about that whatsoever. But I think I used to just deal with it by by being busy. Like I would just take on so many things so I wouldn't have to like deal with the mess. I would just like keep pushing, keep doing all the work. And so I could like feel like I was being successful. And so like that the mess was kind of a byproduct of that, I guess. But then I guess it really just took like COVID and then not being busy to really reflect on that, like, and sort my shit out. And I'm still sorting it out. But yeah, being in your 20s sucks.
I agree.
It's so confusing.
I'm looking forward to getting out of them, It's going to be so great. COVID, I mean, gosh, I think like both literal and metaphorical like shit that we had to deal with in our closets, you know what I mean? That you're sitting there thinking, I can't like pretend that I'm too busy for this like actual mess or metaphorical mess.
but then also to continue the metaphor of I'm like obsessed with the garden metaphor. But it's like this shit is fucking fertilizer. Like it's that ends up being like if you take the time to do the work. And I think it's so helpful seeing it as well. Like there's something about putting a thing in visuals, in images and making a space. It's just, such a different way of engaging with a topic, like being able to hold space for whimsy and seriousness at the same time, which is so refreshing. And
yeah.
Do you have any other questions for Ellen?
That was a great one, by the way. Thank you.
Yeah,
You
it
should
was.
be
Thank
here.
you so much. And thank you for your kind and open, honest answer too, Ellen. All this stuff's a bit icky to talk about, which is why we started a podcast about it, essentially. So we can talk about it all the time.
Cool. Well, I feel like we've kind of been able to touch on the kind of materiality of the art making process alongside the kind of conceptual work as well. And just thank you Ellen, for taking the time firstly to make the work so much fucking labor has gone into this room. It's very clear. And thank you for that. And thanks also for chatting to us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ellen. Thanks everyone for coming.
The end.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Imposter Syndrome Club. Please follow us wherever you find your podcasts. And if you're feeling extra kind, rate and review. Or if you got any insights or value from this, share with a friend.
You can also find us on Instagram at ImposterPod or online at impostersyndromeclub.com.